Arizona Territory, late summer. A sky like hammered tin. Heat shivers the horizon. Wind drives knives of dust across a bone-white arroyo where a broken wagon kneels like a felled animal. Vultures wheel, lightning spiders across distant buttes without rain. A gaunt mare stands blowing foam, the last heartbeat of a widow's luck. Eliza Hart, a young settler widow abandoned by her husband's brother on the promise of fetching water, finds a man half buried at the wash's edge. Chiutsui, called Nantan by his kin, a Chiricahua Apache scout, fevered and shot. With one canteen left and a single bargaining chip, her mare, Eliza must choose: ride for her survival or trade the animal to the well-keeper who controls the only water for 30 miles to buy the stranger a chance at life. She surrenders the reins and lifts the dying man from the dust. But the rider who appeared at dusk was no savior. He wore her dead husband's signet on a chain and asked who taught her to shelter an enemy. This account survives in a sheriff's deposition, where one name was neatly scratched out and a horse brand redrawn over it. Next, you'll see why that single erasure costs 3 lives and frees a herd. The sky looked like hammered tin, and the heat made the horizon shake as if the land itself were breathing wrong. Wind drove knives of dust across a bone-white arroyo, where a broken wagon knelt like a felled animal. One wheel split, and the other sunk to its hub. Vultures wheeled without hurry. Lightning crawled across far buttes, and never found the mercy to become rain. A gaunt mare stood blowing foam, the last heartbeat of a widow's luck, her ribs like the staves of an empty barrel. Near the wash's edge, where the sand crust was thin as a scab, a hand lay half buried, palm up, as if the earth had almost swallowed it and then changed its mind. Eliza Hart had been alone long enough to know the sound of her own name when the land whispered it. She carried a canteen that felt light as a lie and a coil of rope that had seen better years. Ephraim had ridden off 2 hours before with the better canteen and a promise to fetch water, his hat tilted just so, his words warm as summer fence wood. She had watched him vanish into heat shimmer and had told herself the man would come back. Men sometimes did. The axle had snapped with a small, dry sound that reminded her of chicken bones. She had packed what she could in her apron: jerked beef, a needle roll, the church letter with her name on it. And then she saw the hand. He was face down in the wash with sand glued to his cheek and blood dry and black where it had seeped along the ribs. The bullet had gone in close, so close the cloth around it felt burned. He wore a shirt torn at the shoulder, and bits of an army jacket showed as if someone had tried to disguise him as a man who had never worn one. His hair was bound back with a strip of rawhide. Eliza touched his neck and felt a stubborn little tap, not steady, but not gone. She looked at the mare and at the horizon that had no water in it, and then she did a thing that would follow her name in ledgers long after her bones were dust. She lifted the man as best she could, grunting through the pull in her back, and dragged him up onto the wagon's shadow. "Hold," she said to nobody, and then, "Hush," when he tried to breathe and shuddered. She cut her last clean strip from a petticoat and pressed it to the wound and felt the heat coming off him like a stove door left open. She gave him the smallest sip. He coughed, choked, swallowed, and his eyes opened to a slit. They were dark and dry and careful, even while he floated near the far edge of the world. "Chiutsui," he said, the word rough and soft at the same time, as if there were sand between syllables. Then, in halting English, "Nantan." "Eliza," she said, because a name is a bridge, and she needed one. "You've been shot. I'm going to get you to water." He looked at the mare, and then at the sun, and then at her, and something like a small, tired smile ghosted over his mouth. She ignored it. She looped the rope under his arms and cinched it to the wagon frame so he wouldn't slide back into the wash. Then she took the mare's reins, put her hand on the animal's hot neck, and whispered the kind of prayer people who have no priest left to them must make in their own words. She set her jaw and turned toward the only well within a day's walk. Boone Kincaid's well was a circle of stones and a signboard with letters scorched into the wood by a hot iron. Water is fairly traded. Boone said the second word with a smile each time, and men who needed water swallowed the taste of the joke because a mouthful of dust is worse than pride. Boone himself had a way of leaning one shoulder into the shade, so he looked like he owned the half of the day that wasn't light. He kept a ledger with thick pages and burned a tiny brand beside each name, because ink, he said, could be washed or forged, but a brand kept holy company with skin and scar. Eliza led the mare up to the well yard, while the sun snapped at the back of her neck. Boone looked her over, took in her dress, the dried blood on her hands, and the line of strain in her mouth. His eyes slid to the mare like a finger across a knife. "You look as if the day has held you over a fire," he said. "What's your ask, Miss Hart?" "Water and laudanum, cloth, if you have it. Enough for a man to live through the night." "You been feeding strays?" "A man," she said, and made each letter stand alone. "He's dying. Dying men pay poorly." She reached for the mare's reins and brought the animal forward so Boone could see the foam, the shiver in her legs, the way her eyes rolled white at the corners. "I'll trade the mare," she said. "Water and medicines for him, and a few gallons for me." Boone made the face of a man who would be kind if kindness didn't cost, then set the face aside. "Fair," he said. "Sign the ledger and leave the reins." He slid the book toward her. The page already held names. Beside each was a small iron brand mark, like a punctuation mark, that hurt. Eliza took the pen, signed where he tapped, and watched him heat a little brand in a brazier and kiss the paper with it. The smell was wrong. Paper and metal, and another hint she did not name. Boone lifted the reins, and the mare made a small noise of betrayal. So human, Eliza flinched. Boone gave her a canvas sack of water and a brown bottle, and a roll of linen that might once have been a tablecloth, and said, "Trade done." She walked back through the heat with the weight of the water biting her shoulders, and the bottle held like a promise she hoped would not betray her. The land kept breathing wrong. Lightning skittered and offered nothing. At the wagon, she found old Jose Romero, who had come out of the hard country, like an answer she did not know she asked. He was wiry as a javelina, with a hat that had been mended more times than it had been new. He had already slid Nantan into the deeper wedge of shade and wet a cloth from his own small skin. "You bring a ghost back," he said, and nodded toward the bottle. "That will quiet him enough to pull a bullet, or enough to send him to the saints. Sometimes a medicine does not decide until your hand does." "Will you help?" she said. "I will." He glanced at the man's wound. "This is a close shot, not a long chase shot, not a thief's warning. Someone was near and meant to stop his breath." He touched the ragged edge around the hole and teased free a thread with the tip of a bone needle. He held it up. It wasn't from Nantan's shirt. It was a narrow strip of blue wool with a yellow hair of cord twisted through it. "Army jacket," Jose said. "Whoever shot him wanted him to look like a soldier, or wanted a soldier blamed." He did not say more. The wind hummed through the brush like a low voice. Eliza gave Nantan the laudanum drop by drop until the muscles in his face let go, and his breath found a slow, shallow logic. Old Jose's hands were steady as he cleaned the wound. With water he measured, as if it were gold dust, and then worked the bullet out with the stubborn patience of a man who had set 1,000 bones and buried 1,000 more. When the bullet came at last with a wet click, he held it between thumb and finger. It was not mashed the way a far shot flattens, and not pristine the way a miss looks when it lives in the dirt. It had a small smear of cloth attached. Jose wrapped it in a scrap of linen and handed it to Eliza. "Save this. Steel remembers things the mouth denies." He looked at her then, in a way that made her remember she was a woman alone, and men were sometimes the weather. You had to survive. "Your man, where is he?" "Dead," she said. The word still had corners sharp enough to cut. "Silas fell from a horse. That's what the paper says. And what do your bones say?" "My bones say he didn't ride that day." She did not know she would say that until she heard her own voice do it. The sound of it made something else inside her line up with itself, like a wagon wheel finding a rut that fit. "There was rain that week. The parish register was damp when Sister Agnes let me sign. The undertaker's ledger wrote fall, and then added another charge, wax. Eliza swallowed. They used wax when the wound needed covering to keep the flyman from guessing too quickly. Jose nodded, as if she had told him the price of nails. Then it was not only a horse that betrayed you. They worked until near dusk. Nantan slept in a hard, thin way that yanked at the breath now and again, as if a hand under the ribs tugged. Eliza counted his pulse with 2 fingers, and found it, lost it, found it again. She rolled the laudanum bottle in her palm, like a tiny brown world, and set it aside. The light slanted in, and struck sparks from the few glass things she owned. The air changed. Sometimes you know a rider is coming before the hoofbeats. The ground learns it first, and tells the bones. Eliza stood and picked up the shotgun, leaning in the wagon corner. She knew it was empty. The weight of it was still a comfort. Ephraim Hart rode out of the red light, as if the day had decided to take a shape men recognized. He had a pale horse and a pale hat, and the easy seat a man learns when he puts more hours on a saddle than on a pew. He was handsome in the way a knife is handsome when it is new. The first thing she saw after the shine of him was the little round glint at his throat, a signet on a chain, Silas's. Her fingers tightened on wood that could not save her. "You've been busy," Ephraim said, sliding down with one smooth motion and letting the reins fall, because men like him believed horses wanted to stay near them. His eyes swept the wagon, the bundle of rags where Nantan lay, the water sack. He touched the signet and let it drop back against his shirt like a bell that had no church. "You made a trade." "I did," Eliza said. Simple words first. She could stand on those. "You traded a Hart mare for an Apache life. Folks in town will call that poetry, or treason." He smiled a little, the same way Boone smiled when he said fair. "Who taught you to shelter an enemy?" "Nobody," she said. "A man was dying. I had water to buy." She kept the barrel of the shotgun low and planted, not pointed at him, not pointed at the ground. He watched the gun and then watched her, and the watching made her aware that she had 1 pin less at her collar than she had had in the morning. "You don't know what he cost us," he said, and cocked his revolver, so the sound of it was a small gate in a quiet fence line. Eliza stepped between Ephraim and the rags, where Nantan breathed, and felt her heart go small and fast. The way hearts do when they mean to hold a position they are not sure they can keep. "I know what the mare cost," she said. "I paid it with my name in a book." "You'll pay again," Ephraim said, "but you'll pay differently." He lifted the revolver an inch. The barrel pointed past her hip, toward the bundle that had been a stranger, and was now something else, because she had poured water into him. The last of the light went thin as old tea. The wind brought the smell of rain that would not fall. The wagon creaked as if it remembered rolling. Somewhere a bird made the night sound that says, "Hunger without apology." Eliza felt the trigger guard of the empty shotgun press against her palm and thought briefly of the parish register and the way Sister Agnes's ink had bled when she wrote Eliza's name, the loop on the H touching the line above, like a hand reaching up for a hand that would not reach down. Ephraim's mouth found a shape that might have become a word, and then the ground behind him shifted with the soft scuff of boots and the click of a rifle well cared for. Old Jose stepped out from behind the wagon, the sun not yet done with the silver in his stubble. "You pointed wrong," Jose said, and his voice made the words slow and not something you could move aside. Ephraim turned. The revolver twitched, then lowered half an inch. Jose didn't raise his rifle. He just held it the way a carpenter holds a hammer when the nail is where it should be. "You're old," Ephraim said, "and you are late," Jose said. "Late with water, late with truth, late with your brother's ring, swinging where your mother cannot see it." He looked past Ephraim at Eliza. "He will not shoot with me watching." Not yet. Eliza didn't know whether that was a promise or a prayer. She knew it was enough to let the next breath go in and come back out. Ephraim measured them both, then spat dust that was not wet enough to leave a mark on the ground. "You'll see me soon," he said, and touched the signet again, with 2 fingers like a man who had a habit he pretended not to know he had. He swung up and rode away into the red that had decided to turn purple at the edges. They moved Nantan that night. Jose built a fire small enough to fool the dark into thinking it had won. Eliza tore more strips from cloth that had been meant for Sunday hems and nighttime modesty, and not for holding a man's life inside his body. Nantan woke and slept, the lines of his face showing how the body bargains when it has been cheated and wants its full measure paid. When he woke and found her near, he gave a tiny nod that looked like something he had learned in a place where words cost. He lifted a hand as if to draw something in the air and then let it fall. "Breathe with the wind," he said, the English careful and slow, as if it might startle and fly away if he heard it too fast. "If you fight it, it steals more." Eliza tried, because the little he asked was easier to give than the big she had already paid. She breathed until she could hear her own breath match the low whistle of the night moving past the wash. She felt something unknot in a place that had not had a name before, and now did. At first light, she walked back to Kincaid's to return the empty bottle and to ask for more bandage cloth, because a person who is already in debt will often go shopping if the shop door stands open. Boone stood beside the ledger with a damp finger on the edge of a page, the way a man might press a cut to see if it still bled. "You'll want more," he said before she asked. "I'll pay when I can," she said. "I think you'll pay now," Boone said, and tapped the paper. Beside her name, a neat little brand was burned as before. Under it, another line had been added in a different hand, the letters thinner and cooler. "Testify, Apache thief." Boone smiled. "Ephraim Hart says the man you took is a thief. He offers to make sure your name stays clean if you say so to the sheriff. Fair trade." "Fair," Eliza said, because she wanted to hear how the word sounded in her own mouth. It tasted like a coin that had passed through too many hands. "A woman alone is smoke on a breezy day," Boone said. "It blows where the man with the hat points. If you wanted poetry, you should have stayed east," she said. "I came for cloth." "You'll get cloth when the sheriff gets words," he said. "Bring the words back, and I'll sell you every rag that ever wiped a table in this county." He closed the ledger with a fat sound and rested his palm on it. The skin there had a brand scar to match the one on the page. It had healed thick and shiny, like honesty cured wrong. When she stepped out into the yard, the dust made her eyes burn. The mare she had traded stood tied in the shade with a bucket in front of her. The animal raised her head and made that small human sound again, and Eliza felt something move in her that was neither pity nor rage, and had teeth like both. She walked away with empty hands, carrying only the bottle she could not fill, and the picture of the bucket she could not touch. Sister Agnes Bell, undertaker's daughter and keeper of parish papers, let her into the little side room where records lived. The air in there always felt a little damp, as if the books made their own weather. "You look like a person who has been refused by a man with a book," Agnes said without judgment. She was not much older than Eliza, but the work had put a little ash in her hair and a steadiness in her wrists. "Eliza Hart," Eliza said automatically, though they both knew each other. "I need to look." Agnes nodded and lifted the undertaker's ledger, which was heavier than it looked. She laid it on the table and set a sand bottle beside it to keep the page from falling back. The entry for Silas Hart was neat. The cause of death was written as fall from horse in a clerk's hand, even polite, as if the man who wrote had never raised his voice in his life. Below it, indented a little as if someone had whispered to the pen, was another line. "Wax cover for entry wound." A dot of red wax, not from the body, from the ceiling of something else, had bled onto the margin as if it had tried to hide and failed. Agnes held a taper near the page, and the faintest second script showed itself under the first, a ghost of letters scraped thin with a knife, and then written over. "Inquest requested." The words had been scratched almost to nothing, but something in the paper had kept them like a bruise, holds the memory of a blow after the skin goes pale again. "Who wrote that?" Eliza asked. "Not father," Agnes said. "His eyes are flatter. This looks like Sheriff Greeley's hand when he's tired." She wet her lip, set the taper down. "You did not hear that from me. You never say what I hear," Eliza said. The wind outside set the little window to tapping its dry latch against the frame, a sound like 2 teeth clicking. "Agnes," she said, "if I asked you to show me the sheriff's deposition book, would you say no?" "I'd say that book is not parish property." Agnes paused, "and then I would go fetch a cup of water for the altar flowers and leave the room for a moment too long." When Agnes came back, Eliza had looked only with the eyes that did not move from her head. The deposition lay open to a page with a name scratched out as tidy as an erasure can be in a world that uses ink and sharp things. Beside it, someone had drawn a little horse brand, as if a mark burned into hide could replace the shape letters made when they lined up to tell the truth. Eliza felt the shape of the scratched name without knowing it. Sometimes a missing thing speaks louder than words that stay. She shut the book with careful hands and stepped back so Agnes could be the one to touch it again. At the shack where they had bedded Nantan, the day sank all the way into its own dark. Jose had made a poultice that smelled of creosote and smoke and something green the drought had not yet killed. Nantan opened his eyes and looked at them both, then at the small rafters above, as if counting something only he could see. He lifted his hand and made a small gesture, wrist bending, fingers closing and opening like the quick mouth of a little fish. "Mustangs," he said. "Thunderers." Jose nodded with respect. "You know the whistle." Nantan touched his own throat. "My father's father knew. Men steal horses with a rope. We ask them with wind." He set his lips and let out a low, thin sound that was more breath than tone. It barely shifted the rag over his chest. Eliza felt the hair on her forearms rise anyway, as if something not in the room had put its head up somewhere far off. "Rest," Jose said. "You'll need the wind tomorrow." They did not get tomorrow on their terms. Near midnight, hoofs sounded in a number that meant a squad, not a family, and voices had the cadence of orders that come from a card table too far away. Lieutenant Henry Wade led 6 men into a half circle around the shack, their horses tight-reined, their jackets neat even at this hour. He had a clean jaw and the kind of eyes a schoolteacher has when he has not yet learned that children lie for sport. "Open," Wade said. He meant the door, but the word hung in the air like something larger. Eliza stepped out with her hands where he could see them. Jose leaned on the jamb with an ease that did not fool anyone. Wade's gaze took in the bottle, the cloth, the water skin. He did not look at the wagon because soldiers have an agreement with wagons. They don't testify unless asked. "We're after stolen remuda," Wade said. "Word says an Apache scout runs with them. Word says he's hurt." "Word says a lot," Jose said. Wade did not take the bait. "Hand him over," he said. "If he's innocent, the army will clear him." Eliza almost laughed, because some things are funny in the way a step into the air is funny when you thought there was a stair. "He'll die on the way," she said. "He's barely keeping breath." "Then he'll die in custody," Wade said, and his voice had sorrow in it. "I'd prefer he did not, but I take him either way." He lifted a hand. The ring of men tightened. The horses' ears flicked. The sound their leather made was like small waves slapping a dock. Eliza looked at Jose. Jose looked back. He lifted his chin half an inch toward the rear of the shack, where the ground fell away into a wash that liked to play dead and then run hard when it rained. It had not rained. That did not mean the land would be kind. Eliza drew in a breath the way Nantan had taught her, letting the wind set the pace. She moved because there are moments when you do not own your feet. She set her hand on the doorframe, felt the splintered groove where some man's ring had worn the wood smooth in the shape of his stubbornness, and pushed the door wide enough for the lieutenant to see the bundle in the corner, the bandage, the dark curve of hair against the linen. This account survives in a sheriff's deposition, where one name was neatly scratched out and a horse brand redrawn over it, the narrator said, and for a breath, the story itself leaned toward you, like a friend who knows a private road. Next, you will see why that single erasure costs 3 lives and frees a herd. Wade stepped forward. His men shifted to close the circle. Somewhere beyond the low ridge, a coyote made the sound coyotes make when they are bored with their own hunger. The air held itself like a held note. Eliza put her hand on the bed's rough rail and felt the small tremor in the wood that meant hoofbeats a long way off, many of them, or thunder without rain, or trouble that brings its own weather. Wade did not feel it yet. He was looking at the wound and at the clean square of bandage Jose had set, and at the strip of blue wool with a yellow hair of cord that lay wrapped in linen on the crate beside the bed. "That's army cloth," Wade said quietly, as if he were talking to himself and not to the room. "Where did you—" The yard filled with long shadows as more men moved into position. The shack door frame went darker, with a shape that cut the doorway in two. Sheriff Abel Greeley stood there, hat in hand, tired in the bones and careful in the eyes. He looked from Eliza to Wade, to the bundle on the bed, and then down at his hands, which had a smudge of ink on the forefinger, even at this hour, because a man's habits do not sleep when he does. He opened his mouth to put peace in the room and put himself in the middle of a wheel that had not yet decided who it wanted to roll over. The troopers lifted carbines with the ease of men whose practice has made their hands into parts of the tool. "By county authority," Greeley said, the words slow because he wanted them right. "I require—" The wind shifted and brought a breath of creosote and the tiniest taste of rain that was not going to fall. Eliza looked at the lieutenant and at the sheriff and at Jose and at the man on the bed who had given her a word for breathing when words had not seemed helpful for anything. She thought of the ledger with the brand kiss beside her name and of the parish register where ink bled into old paper and made shadows like bruises. She thought of Ephraim's fingers touching a signet that did not belong at his throat. She thought of the mare with the bucket she had bought, with the life she did not own. She said, "No," in a voice that was not loud and not soft, and had the shape of a plank set across a gap. The circle of soldiers closed another pace. The shack seemed to tilt toward a choice it had been aiming at all day, without telling anyone. Outside, something trembled in the ground that was not fear. It felt like the long, slow breath a herd takes in before it decides to run. Lieutenant Wade did not bark the next order. He lifted 2 fingers, and the men eased, not down, but into a steadier aim. He had seen the cloth on the crate, and the careful square of bandage, and the woman who said no, as if the word had walls. He also had orders, which are their own kind of weather. Sheriff Greeley cleared his throat and tried for the tone a father uses at a table when he wants men who are no longer boys to remember what it felt like to be corrected by someone who loved them. "We can settle this without a scrape," he said. "Miss Hart, you know I don't like to take a man from a bed. Lieutenant, you know I can't let the county say one thing while the army says another." Old Jose set his rifle down just enough to make the barrel no longer red as a threat. He said to Wade, "You got a good look at that cloth?" Wade nodded once. Jose said, "Then you know why this man isn't the thief you were told about. Someone wearing your colors put that bullet where the good Lord keeps a rib for a reason. You want to name names. Do it after he can stand long enough to point." Wade looked at Nantan again. The man on the bed watched back, awake now, without showing much of it, eyes dry and careful, breath held shallow to keep pain from waking up. Wade's jaw shifted. "I cannot leave him unguarded," he said. "Not with the reports I carry, but I can station men outside and let the night pass without a march." He looked at Greeley. "We keep him here till dawn. Then I take custody." Greeley chewed that slowly. It let him be 2 men at once, the one who liked peace and the one who did not want to be caught on the wrong side of a ledger. "Dawn," he said at last, and tipped his hat forward the smallest bit so the shadow hid how tired he was of choosing the easy wrong. The troopers set up a loose ring by the mesquite, horses dozing, bridles chinking now and again, as if silver spoke in its sleep. Inside, Eliza touched Nantan's wrist and counted. The pulse answered. She cooled his lips and listened to him breathe. Once, he whispered a word she did not know. Jose told her later it meant the small wind that lives close to the ground, the one you feel when a herd changes its mind. She slept in stitches, mending herself a few breaths at a time. Near dawn, the ring of men changed. The horses raised their heads and blew softly. Wade stood. He was a fair man living inside a system that did not always reward fairness. He stepped to the door and rapped. "It's time." Eliza looked at Jose. Jose looked at the floor. Some choices get made in the body before they find their way to the tongue. Nantan sat up with a sound like a rope drawn through a tight knot. He put his feet on the floor. He did not have the strength to stand long. He had enough to move, and sometimes the difference between those two is the difference the day needs. Jose handed him a short stick, cut from a scrub limb, and smoothed so the hand would not find a splinter when it had no extra curse left to spend on pain. They came out together. Wade said, "Thank you," and meant it for the tone of the thing, if not the thing itself. Then Ephraim Hart stepped into the yard from the far side, using the shape of the shed and the tired eyes of men who had looked in one direction too long. He had Boone Kincaid with him, and Boone's ledger under his arm, as if a book could serve as a shield. "Glad you've got him tidy," Ephraim said. "Saves me labor." He glanced at Eliza. "Saves you from lying in court, too." Boone lifted the ledger. "She'll say the words. I got the line ready." He tapped a blank beneath her name with one finger that had the brand scar on it. The iron mark on his skin met the idea of the iron mark on the page, like kin at a funeral. Wade frowned. "There will be no court here," he said. "Army matter." Ephraim smiled the way a man smiles. At a waiter, he plans to tip with money taken from his brother's coat. "Everything here is a heart matter. Water, horses, land. I keep the books men really live by." He set his palm lightly on the signet at his throat. Not enough to call attention. Enough to feel the weight of it against his skin and take a private pleasure in it. Sheriff Greeley looked from man to man and chose, like he always did, the choice that kept the next hour quiet. "Let the Army have him," he said. "Miss Hart can put her statement on paper at the office, so words don't get lost in dust." Eliza felt something caught her pin in her give a little. She said, "I'll put words where they belong when I see the paper that I lost mine before." Greeley winced. He had hoped she would not say it in daylight. "Sheriff," she said, "there's a line in your book where my husband's inquest was asked and then made to disappear. If we're telling the truth today, let's tell a full measure." Wade turned his head the smallest amount. "Inquest?" he said. Greeley cleared his throat and found a cough. "Paperwork is like weather, Lieutenant," he said. "Some of it blows off fences. Some of it is nailed down," Eliza said, and thought of Sister Agnes's neat hand and the way the sand bottle kept the ledger page from turning on its own. They started the march anyway. 2 troopers flanked Nantan. Wade rode ahead with Greeley, talking low. Boone and Ephraim lagged on the near side, keeping eyes on Eliza, as if she were a loose wire that might spark. Jose walked with his hand near Nantan's elbow without touching, the kind of help a proud man can accept. The land fooled everyone by smelling like rain, and then offering none. They reached the stretch where the road thinned to shale. The wash that liked to play dead lay to the right, dry and sullen. Eliza looked down at the ground and saw the print of a small hooved colt laid over older, wider tracks. She could read enough to know a herd had come near in the night and then turned, as if a voice had asked, and they had answered. She looked at Nantan. His jaw was set, but his eyes were not on the road. They were far away, listening. At the rise before Kincaid's, a man in an army jacket stepped out from behind a mesquite, raised his hand, and called, "Hold." For a breath, Eliza thought it was a stranger. Then she saw the way the yellow cord at the shoulder had been stitched back on, wrong side to right, and knew the jacket had lived 2 lives. The man who wore it now was one of Boone's hands in borrowed colors. He had his hat low and a strip of cloth across the lower half of his face, the way men do when the dust is bad or when they want to be a little less themselves. Wade reined in. "Identify," he said. The man lifted the cloth as if to show a smile. He turned and whistled. More shapes moved behind the brush. Not soldiers. Boone's men. Hat brims wrong, boots wrong. The lazy loop of a man who works water and walls. Not drill. Wade swore once. A short word squeezed down for fit. "You've dressed your thieves as soldiers," Jose said to Boone without turning his head. Boone kept his face even. Cloth is cloth, he said. Only a fool respects dye. Ephraim eased his horse a step left so he could see Eliza, and she could see the little bright circle at his throat without trying. Tell the lieutenant what you told me, he said, voice soft. Say the man is a thief and a killer. Tell him you saw the Mustangs move like smoke because this one called them. Tell him Silas followed and paid with his neck when they broke. He smiled. Say it pretty. They like it pretty. Eliza thought about the night noise of ink under a blade. She thought about the red dot of wax that had bled. She thought about the mare and the bucket. Terror and anger make a tight knot in a person. Sometimes it holds them up. Sometimes it pulls them apart. She felt it tighten and chose to stand. I saw a man half buried in a wash with army cloth in his wound, she said. I saw a well keeper who takes horses as payment for breath. I saw my husband buried with words that do not match his body. If you want pretty, you'd better start praying. Wade said to his men, hold your line. Then to Boone's men, stand down and remove the jackets. Boone made a small noise like a laugh clipped before it could harm. You order men who don't work for you, Lieutenant. Out here, money gives orders. Out here, Jose said, the ground gives orders. You are forgetting what hooves can say. Nantan drew a breath. It was not deep. It was a breath that knew its work. He put 2 fingers to his mouth. Wade's gaze snapped to him. The troopers lifted barrels. Greeley raised a palm and let it fall. The gesture of a man who hopes his hand will be taken as wisdom, because his mouth has found only trouble lately. Nantan did not whistle. Not yet. He bent and touched the dust with the tips of his fingers, then brought them to his chest, then to his mouth, then to the air. It looked like a prayer. It was also a code. Far to the west, something moved in a low line. Wade saw dust and thought wind. Jose saw dust and thought of hooves. Boone saw dust and thought of money. Ephraim saw dust and thought trouble he could turn into profit with the right push. Eliza saw dust and remembered the small rise in the floor when the herd breathes before it runs. Lieutenant, Jose said quietly, you can die on the wrong side of a book today, or you can live long enough to help me turn a page right. Wade kept his eyes on the dust. What would right look like? Let these watermen play soldier, Jose said. Step your real men back 3 paces and keep your hands off the trigger. If the thunderers come to his breath, they'll go where he points, not where you aim. You try to own that with bullets, they'll trample us all. Wade was young enough to listen and old enough to know when. He raised his hand and dropped it twice, quickly. His men eased their horses back the width of a spine. Boone's men did not move. They had not learned to read signals that were not given with coin. Nantan lifted his face. The wind had turned. It came from the west now, thin and warm, with the faintest iron taste that sometimes rides rain that never happens. He put his lips together and made a sound that was more like shaping the space the sound would live in than like a note. It went out anyway. It slid under the skin of the air. It touched the dust in a way that drew a line in it the eye could not see, but the dust obeyed. The herd came like weather, deciding to be an animal. The first horses were not the largest. They were the ones with more nerve than sense. Young, thin-necked, ears up, whites of eyes showing fine as thread. Behind them, the weight came. A black-maned stallion cut the rise with a forefoot like a hammer and a shoulder like a door. The whole ridge behind him moved alive. Sound hit a heartbeat later. It reached the men like a hand to the chest. The army mounted, shifted, and planted. Boone's hired horses snorted and showed white because they knew the difference between work and a thing older than work. Nantan did not move forward. He stood and lifted his hand the smallest bit, and the herd did something Eliza could not name in any tongue she had been raised in. It unbraided the front of itself and slid past in 2 streams around him, like water parting around a rock, only there because the river wanted something to push against. Dust wrapped him to the knees and then fell again. The black-maned stallion checked hard at the well-yard fence ahead, the same fence Eliza had leaned on yesterday when she could not touch a bucket. He blew hard and pawed once. The Mustangs behind him flowed, slowed, and circled. The yard was ringed with breathing. The sound was not like rain. It was like rain had learned to speak chest deep. Boone reached for his ledger, as if a book could save a man's bones from 1,000 hooves. Ephraim reached for his gun because guns had always made him feel taller. Wade lifted his hand to stop both, and knew he could not stop either. Eliza could see the small sap pulse in Ephraim's throat. She could see the way his fingers had learned the path to the trigger so well that they hardly had to practice it anymore. Jose moved before thinking and knocked Ephraim's wrist sideways. The shot cracked. The bullet went where men never meant it to at a time like that. Diagonal. It tore through Boone's shoulder meat and took with it the last illusion the well-keeper had about how much the world loved him. He staggered and fell into the ledger. The book tumbled. It hit a stone and skidded. It opened to Eliza's name and the little iron brand kiss. Dust gritted into the wet of Boone's blood and made mud that would dry into a story no pen could make neat. The black-maned stallion reared, front hooves striking air that already knew what it was for. Wade shouted, "Hold," in a voice that could have been panic and could have been command, and men obeyed, because those two are cousins, in a soldier's ear. The herd tightened. Nantan lifted his hand higher and shifted his palm toward the well. The stallion dropped to earth, put his head down, and watched Nantan the way a man watches a lit fuse. Nantan crooked his fingers, and the animal turned. It was a small miracle, and looked like plain work. "Eliza Hart," Nantan said, voice rough, English cut into careful pieces. "Trade is fair." She did not know what to answer. He did not wait. He stepped into the yard, breath catching like a hoof on rock, and reached down to pick up Boone's ledger. He held it up flat on his palm to the herd, the way a trainer shows a new thing to a colt, so it will not spook. The black-maned stallion stretched his nose and blew. Dust swirled and settled on the open page. Ephraim, knocked sideways, found his stance again, with that swift grace he still owned. He brought the pistol up, teeth bared now, not in a smile. Jose swung the butt of his rifle, not to kill, to interrupt. The Mustangs shied and stamped, raised heads and set them again. The world got very thin for a breath. Eliza saw Ephraim's muzzle flash before she heard the sound. She did not see where the ball went. She did not know yet who had started to fall. Troopers shouted. Boone made a thin scream like a man who cannot find a word big enough for what he is feeling. Wade moved to shadows he could not control and tried to pretend he could. Greeley stood with his hat in his hand and ink on his finger and looked like a man who had missed the station and now watched the train. He needed move on without him. Dust folded itself over the scene and then opened like a curtain, pulled wrong. In the hard slack that follows a shot, men make decisions as if the body knows it cannot stand in that thinness long. Wade kicked Ephraim's pistol away. Jose put his rifle down and raised both hands to show he was not the danger he could be. Boone clutched his shoulder and said, "You owe me, to no one and everyone." Nantan stood with the ledger still open. He did not sway. He did not bleed new. He looked at Eliza, and then at Wade, and then at the horse with the black mane, and said, "Trade is fair. Water for life. Words for truth." Wade found his voice. "We're not writing contracts with horses," he said, but there was no mockery in it. There was a small boy who had just learned that the world is bigger than the maps in his schoolroom. "You will write," Nantan said. "You already did." He turned the ledger so the page faced the sheriff. The little brand marks puckered in the dust, like scars on skin. "Put your name where it belongs." Then we all breathed. Greeley looked as if someone had asked him to pick up a coal. He took a step. Agnes Bell's face came into Eliza's. Mind then, and the neat way she set ash on wet ink to keep it from crawling. Eliza said, "Sheriff, your deposition holds a hole where a name should be." She felt the herd's breath on her arms, warm, animal, alive in a way that did not ask permission. "You scratched it. Scratch it back in. Then we can bury what needs burying and leave the rest standing." Greeley's mouth opened. His hand went to his pocket, where the little pen lived. He did not draw it. His eyes slid to Ephraim, as if the younger man still owned the horizon. Ephraim met the look and smiled, small and mean, careful. he said. Ink stains. Bloodstains worse. A tremor ran through the herd, a small ripple of muscle and mood. The black-maned stallion struck once at the ground with one front hoof, and the sound was like arguing with God. Nantan's eyes sharpened. He made a low click with his tongue. The stallion stilled. Dust carried the click outward, like a whispered order men could not hear, but horses could. The heat climbed back up the day, as if it had gone to drink and returned stronger. Boone breathed in small, fast sips. Blood made his shirt stick. He staggered nearer the well, half for shade, half because pain pulls people to holes. He set one hand on the low stone rim. The top rock shifted. No one saw it, except the ruin itself. The mortar had dried to powder years ago. 1,000 hands had leaned there. Stone does not forget, but it forgives slowly. Boone's weight slid wrong. The stone tipped. Boone grabbed harder, which is what men do when the ground lets go. The rim gave. The stone fell forward with Boone following, knees buckling, ledger slipping from his arm, pages riffled by the small wind a falling body makes. Someone shouted. The word was probably no. It turned to dust halfway down the shaft. The well swallowed sound, then offered it back late and muffled. The herd jumped as one animal and set again. Greeley made a sign that no church owned anymore. Wade lunged but grabbed air. Ephraim stared down into the hole as if the hole had insulted him personally. Silence took the yard in its mouth. Then the small sounds came back. The creak of leather, a trooper clearing his throat, Jose whispering something in Spanish to the old saints that live in rocks. The ledger lay open at Eliza's feet. She looked down. Her name held the little iron brand kiss. Under it, Boone had inked a thin line for a sentence she would not say. She bent, tore the line across with the edge of her hand. Not neat, not careful. The paper cut her. Blood dotted the margin. She did not suck the sting away. Some stings should stay. Wade crouched at the well. He said very quietly, "He's gone." He stood and looked at the circle of men, and at the woman, and the wounded man, and the old vaquero, and the herd that watched, as if this were a story horses would tell later. "This is my scene now," he said, the army officer back on his tongue. "There will be a report. There will be names." "There will be the right names," Eliza said. Wade met her gaze and did not look away. Something clicked behind his eyes that had the shape of a decision. "Sheriff," he said, "we will exhume Silas Hart." Greeley flinched. "We will do it by light at the parish yard. Sister Agnes will bring the ledger. I will sign an inquest with the date as it should have been. If the county throws me out after, I'll wear the throwing like a medal." Greeley's voice came back thin. "You'll tear this town." "This town is already torn," Wade said. "We're only deciding whether to stitch or to let it rot." He looked at Nantan. "You will not run." Nantan looked at the herd, and then at the men with guns, and then at Eliza. "Not yet," he said. "There is a debt. I will stand until it is paid." Greeley touched his pocket and finally brought out the pen. His hand shook. "We'll go to the parish," he said, "but we do it quietly. People don't like their dead moved in daylight." "People shouldn't have to," Jose said. "But sometimes the dead move the living." They left the yard in a strange procession, army first, as if the uniform could still set a shape to chaos. Eliza beside the litter they made for Nantan out of 2 poles and a tarp. Jose behind with his hat in his hand, because grief makes men polite to everything. Ephraim walking a little apart like a dog that has decided to pretend it is a wolf. The herd ghosting the ridge, not far, not near, drawn to the sound of a whistle that had not been blown again. The dust their hooves made glowed in the high light, like something the sun had changed its mind about. At the parish yard, Sister Agnes stood waiting with a cloth in her hand to cover her hair against dust and the habit of reverence. The undertaker's ledger lay on the table under the little window, and the parish register beside it. The yard smelled of iron and dry weeds, and occasional lilies when a family had saved for them. Wade spoke to Agnes softly. She listened. Her eyes widened only at the part where a name in the sheriff's book had been scratched, and then she expected to do the work of truth anyway. They went to the Hart grave. The stone said only Silas. Men in these parts often forgot the rest of their own names. once they had land to answer to. Wade took off his jacket. He was not afraid to dig. Jose and 2 troopers used shovels that had bored red dirt too many times. Eliza stood still and counted breaths, and did not cry because she had done all the crying she had for Silas, on a day when the sky had been full of coals instead of knives. When they lifted the lid enough to see what needed seeing, Wade made a sound in his throat, the sound an honest man makes when a lie has touched him with a dirty hand. "Entry wound," he said. He did not have to add confirmed. Sister Agnes closed her eyes and said nothing with her mouth, and a great deal with the grip she had on the ledger. Greeley looked like a man listening to a church bell that had never tolled before in his county. They closed the ground again. Wade wrote. He dated his signature the day after Silas's burial. Not today. He added a note. Delay in filing, due to error in chain of custody. He looked at Greeley. Your name, he said. Greeley bent and wrote slowly. His hand steadied as he made his own letters honest. He did not scratch anything out. He added what had been taken. Inquest requested. He looked up and met Eliza's gaze. I am sorry, he said. It did not fix anything. It turned the first step toward mending. Nantan watched from the shade of the gate. He had color in his mouth again. Not much. The herd's dust hung beyond the fence like a tired veil. He lifted a hand to Eliza. Fair, he said, and let his fingers rest. It did not end there. A peace that comes at noon rarely sees supper. Boone's men, scattered by the shock of the well, found parts of themselves again. Men don't always love a dead boss. They love pay. They drifted toward Ephraim, who knew how to turn drift into aim. He spoke low to 3 of them, then to a 4th, then to a 5th. He pointed at the parish and at the army, and at Eliza and at Nantan, in the gate. He did not have to use the word thief. Some words live in a man's shoulders. Greeley went to the office for his deposition book. Agnes stayed with Eliza and the ledgers. Wade sent 2 troopers to circle the yard and told the others to water the horses, as if doing a thing you would do on a normal day could tempt the day to become normal. Jose took off his hat and set it on the register table and said, We are not done with caves. Caves, Eliza said. Scorpion wash, Jose said. Petroglyphs there mark a mouth the old ones used when the sky had claws. If we move him there, the army can pretend not to know for a night, and we can think slow without the ring of boots. Wade heard him and did not say no. I did not hear where, he said, which was yes with a uniform on. But make haste. I cannot hold 2 lines of men apart with the weight of my name much longer. They made a litter stronger than the first, and moved Nantan as gently as men who have to hurry can. Agnes wrapped a small packet in oilcloth and pressed it into Eliza's hand. The page, she said. If someone burns this house, the parish can still speak. Eliza took it and slid it into the inside of her bodice, where sweat would keep it from slipping and her bones would keep it from breaking. They left by the back lane, past the big cottonwood that had outlived 3 pastors and 4 droughts, and the baby graves that make even men who do not believe lay a hand on their hat. The sun slid lower and threw long bars of light across the road that made the wagons look like they were behind a jail. Scorpion Wash waited, dry and still as a sting that has not found skin. The cave mouth was a black smile under a lip of rock scratched with old shapes. Deer, spiral, a man with arms up. Nantan's eyes found the figures and softened. He said a word that Jose translated without being asked. Home, Jose said. Not to live, to remember. Inside, the cool wrapped them, and the heat fell off like a coat. They set Nantan on a bed of folded blankets and brushes, and lit a small lamp that did not smoke. Eliza moved to the back, where the rock made a niche the size of a folded hand. Something was tucked there, wrapped in a square of cloth, the way a mother wraps a child's keepsake, a tooth, a ribbon, a coin. She reached and brought it out and felt the shape of folded paper. She opened it with fingers that had learned in the parish how to lift without tearing. A coroner's inquest stub looked back at her, thin and official and wrong, in the way the date wore itself. Signed, L.T. Henry Wade. Date, the day after burial. Countersign. She waited for the next line. There was a blank. The sheriff's side had never been written. It was like a sentence with the last word missing, the kind of absence that changes the color of all the words before it. She turned and called Jose low. He came and looked and put 2 fingers on the paper, the way a man touches a forehead, to check for fever. "Hiding place," he said. Somebody tried to keep one straight thing from bending. He tilted his head toward the mouth of the cave. "Do not hold it up in the light yet. A shadow sometimes keeps a thing safer than a truth spoken at the wrong time." Footsteps came then, clear in the mouth of the cave, the scrape a heel makes when it carries anger with it and does not care for how stone bites back. The lamp flame wobbled. Nantan's fingers closed on air where a knife would have been if a different day had put him here. Eliza slid the inquest paper into her dress without looking, the motion small, the kind of tuck a woman makes 100 times a day with a shawl or a strand of hair. Ordinary, invisible. A shape filled the opening, wide at the shoulders, hat low enough to make a face into a choice. The revolver in the hand wrote a line in the air that spelled no before the mouth did. The silhouette looked like a notch cut into a wall to let a man shoot from safety. The voice that came with it was calm and pleased with itself. "Evening," Ephraim Hart said. "I told you you'd see me soon." Ephraim stepped in with the muzzle first, and the rest of him following like a man convinced the world should move aside when he arrived. The cave turned his voice into a smoother thing. "You made quite a parade back there," he said. "Army, priest's girl, half the county's dust. You always did like to make trouble tidy." He let his gaze walk past Eliza to Nantan on the brush bed, then to Jose by the lamp, then back to Eliza again. He took off his hat and held it loose by the brim, a casual shape that made the gun in his other hand look even more decided. Old Jose did not reach for his rifle. He had left it outside on purpose because a cave will take a bullet and send the echo back meaner. He spoke like he was ordering coffee in a place that did not serve it. "You shot your brother," he said. Ephraim's mouth made a tired smile. "I kept the ranch from being handed to the first sweet-talker who came along with a plan to bleed it into horses and whiskey. Silas had a gentle hand and no head for numbers. He followed a herd into the flats like a boy follows a parade. He tripped his own neck when the rope came tight. He flicked his eyes to Eliza's dress, the way a man watches a cat more than a mouse. And you, Widow Hart, you always wanted to put words on paper. You put any on me that a man could hang from?" Eliza felt the stiff square of the inquest stub, warm against her ribs, where the oilcloth lived. She kept her hands down. "You wore his ring to my camp," she said. "You told the well man to brand my name. You wear the county like a coat and think no one can see the seams." "You always liked the sound of your own courage," Ephraim said, but his eyes flicked to the cave mouth as if he did not like standing his back to a dark he did not choose. "Where's the sheriff's book? Where's the little church mouse with the ink on her fingers?" "She writes truth," Eliza said. "It bleeds slow, but it stains." Nantan lifted his head. Pain creased his brow, but his voice was steady. "Trade is fair," he said. "You give back the thing you took, the signet, the lies." Ephraim's gaze slid to him with the sickle shine men get when they see a man they'd rather finish than feed. "You," he said, "you and your thunder horses. You think breath can hire beasts. You think a whistle ought to change who owns the ground." He touched the ring again with his free hand, an old habit stripping him out of his pose. "This is mine now. Everything on Heartland is mine now. You can't own wind," Jose said. "You can't own a whistle. You can't own a woman's name." "Can't I?" Ephraim said, and took one step in. Gun steady, hat hand loose. "Let's test what I can own." A smaller sound came from behind him, the soft scrape of a boot that was trying not to. Wade's voice followed, clipped low so it would not run away and make a mess, but strong enough to handle what it would have to carry. "Holster it, Hart." Ephraim didn't turn. "This is a church now, Lieutenant. You giving orders to a man visiting his family?" The gun stayed up, not pointed at Eliza, and not pointed at Nantan. A lazy line down the middle, the way a snake points its head when it has not chosen which rabbit to shame yet. Greeley's silhouette joined Wade's, hat brim, a worried half-moon. "Ephraim," the sheriff said, "it's done. We signed. We wrote what we should have. Step back from this rock and be smart for once. Ephraim laughed, a small, neat sound that did not belong to men who work for a living. You always did think ink made truth. Ink is just water that learned to hold still. You scratch and think the page won't remember the first line. It did remember, Eliza said. That's how you got here with a gun instead of a lawyer. He moved the muzzle the smallest bit toward her face, and the cave made the move into a larger thing. You were supposed to come home when I asked, he said. You were supposed to be grateful when I offered a bed and a fence and a ledger you did not have to think about. You married a heart. You thought that meant the family would keep you. It means the family keeps what belongs to it. Then keep this, Eliza said, and reached with 2 fingers into the seam of her bodice and drew the oilcloth packet out slow enough that everybody in the cave had time to count to 5. Ephraim's gun followed the movement. Wade's hand twitched toward his own. Greeley swallowed air, like it might be the last sweet thing he was going to get. Eliza unfolded the oilcloth and showed the coroner's stub to the lamplight, with her thumb on the blank where the sheriff's countersign should have been, and her other thumb on Wade's neat name and the wrong date. A straight piece, she said, hidden because a crooked line was easier to sell. You won't own this. Ephraim's face put on a new thing. For a breath, he was not the man with a gun and a pale hat. He was a boy who had been seen when his tricks were supposed to work in the dark. Then the man was back. He took 1 step and reached to snatch the paper, because the body will always grab what the mind fears. Wade stepped in and took Ephraim's wrist with a soldier's grip, heel of hand on bone, twist that makes fingers forget they have orders. The gun went off then, but not at anything men had meant to shoot. Flame licked rock. Noise broke in the cave and returned meaner. A chip of stone stung Eliza's cheek. Wade and Ephraim went to the ground together like 2 dogs who never learned to share. Jose kicked the pistol into the shadows and let it growl there without teeth. Greeley moved in with hands up like a man approaching a skittish mare, then did the right thing for maybe the first time in too long. He drove a forearm into Ephraim's shoulder and pinned him, while Wade wrestled the fight out of the gun hand. Ephraim snarled breath, sweat, and old anger. You'll drown on land, he spat. You'll drink dust till your teeth crack. You already did, Eliza said. At the well. Outside, a low thunder answered that did not care about men's petty words. It rolled along the washlip and shook grit from the cave roof like dry rain. It was not stormy. It was a herd shifting, the front ranks turning to face the mouth, where men argued. Nantan sat up and swung his legs off the bed, as if the sound had put bones back in him. He stood. He did not have standing in him for long, but he borrowed from whatever old thing lends itself to men who mean a thing hard enough. He touched the rock wall, where the old man with arms up had been scratched by hands that wanted to send a message they could not deliver with flesh. He put his palm there, and then put his hand to his mouth and let out a small sound, a breath shape, more than a whistle. The kind of noise a newborn makes that makes grown people weep because it proves the world still chooses yes sometime. The herd came to the mouth of the wash and pooled there, sound stacked on sound until it filled the cave from behind the men, like a river filling a room from the ceiling. Wade's eyes widened. Greeley went still as a post. Ephraim felt the ground's talk through the grit in his teeth, and something finally told his blood a truth his head had refused. There were forces in this county he would never invoice. Walk, Nantan said to Eliza, soft, so the word would belong to her, not the men. We go into the day. We take the book and the breath. We leave the whole to the earth. They came out together into the glare. The herd stood in an arc, eyes bright, necks wet, hide smelling of sun and sage and old decisions. The black-maned stallion stood closest, head high, ears forward, not afraid, only curious, the way wild things do wonder with their bodies. Nantan stepped to the center of the mouth and lifted his hand, palm open, fingers quiet. The stallion took 1 step, then another, stopped, as if the ground had told him that was close enough to the kind of firemen carry. Wade, chest heaving from the fight and the run of his heart, stared at the ring of horses, and then at Nantan, and then at his own hands. He did not lift them. He let them hang. He looked at Eliza and spoke like a man who had found the one sentence that would not lie to him. "This is not mine to command," he said, "but I will testify to it." Greeley stood with the inquest stub in his palm now, because Eliza had placed it there. He held it like a hot horseshoe. "You dare yourself to carry the one more step you need. I will sign where I didn't," he said, "and I will write the name I scratched." He glanced up at Ephraim, who stood between Wade and Jose, wrists bound with a strip cut from Jose's sash. "Ephraim Hart," he said aloud, because saying a name admits the world to the truth. "You are under arrest for tampering with a county record and for obstruction. There will be more charges." Ephraim's smile tried to climb back onto his face. It failed. He did not beg. Men like him save by begging for rooms with no witnesses. He lifted his chin and looked at Eliza. "You'll water that ranch with tears," he said. "You don't know what ground asks." Eliza looked past him to the herd. The colt at the back, small, nervous, with a blaze on its face like a lightning bolt drawn by a child, lifted its head and stamped once and watched her with a frankness that felt like a door opening. "I know what it asks," she said, "and I know what I'll answer." The rest was the kind of work that makes stories less exciting and lives possible. Wade marched Ephraim to town with 2 troopers and a rope, looped not tight, but sure. Greeley went with them, ink already under his nail again, because he kept testing the pen point, the way a man tests a tooth that has hurt him for months. Jose stayed with Eliza and Nantan and the herd, which does not mean guard so much as witness. Sister Agnes met them at the parish with the ledger already open, and the sand bottle ready, and the little cross on the wall looking at all of them, with its usual mild demand that people choose better. Next time, they wrote. Wade dated as he should have. Greeley countersigned and added "inquest requested" beside the ghost of his old erasure, not trying to hide it now. Agnes pressed sand and blew gently, and watched the grains take the shine off fresh truth. She turned to a page further on, and added a new line in a neat hand. "Child born to Eliza Hart. Guardian, Eliza Hart. Father, Windmark." She looked up and did not smile. She did not need to. The ink smiled by itself. At Kincaid's well, men pulled stones back into place and set mortar to hold what hands had loosened. Boone did not come home. The bucket rope was cut and tied with a knot that would not slip. Jose found Boone's ledger, where it had fallen in the dust and dried blood, and brought it to Eliza. She looked at the page with her name on it, at the thin line Boone had penciled for a sentence she had refused, at the little iron brand kiss burned beside her hand. She pressed her thumb on the iron mark and found it cold, not holy. She closed the book and tied it shut with a strip of cloth and handed it to Wade. "Put it with the other paper," she said. "If a record can rot, let it rot where you can see it." Nantan kept his promise in a way that made a new thing out of old. He led the herd not across the ranch and into a trap, not toward men who would throw ropes, but in a long, slow circle along the ridge and into the flats where the land has room for 1,000 decisions. He whistled low, and the black-maned stallion turned and drove the young ones toward a cut where grass still grew green at the bottom from seep. He brought 2 mares to the edge and left them, not caught, not broken, just lingering in the way. A choice lingers when you put it down and walk away and hope it follows of its own mind. He set the colt with the lightning blaze nearer than the mares and looked at Eliza with a question in his eyes, which he did not put to words. She nodded. He looked satisfied in a way that did not read as victory, only as the right measure given and taken. That night, the town was quiet, the way a body is quiet after a fever breaks. Spent, sweet, a little unsure of what morning will want. Eliza sat on the step of the wagon that had not moved and watched stars arrange themselves back into the old story. Jose smoked and told a tale about a vaquero who once outrode a storm by talking to it. Sister Agnes brought a loaf and left it and did not stay, because sometimes kindness is more useful when it is simple and does not require thanks. Greeley walked by in the dark. hat off, head bare to the air, and did not pause, which is a kind of respect. Wade stood once at the fence and looked at the ridge where the herd had gone, and then walked away with the slow stride of a man who has decided to argue upward with his superiors until the argument hurts his career and helps his sleep. Close to midnight, with the air cool enough to forgive the day, Nantan came to the edge of the yard. He did not enter. He stood with a shape that was both present and not asking, like wind on a warm night. Eliza rose. "A debt is paid," he said. "Your horse became breath. My breath became hard. We do not owe." "Maybe we don't," she said, "but I am grateful." He nodded once. He glanced past her to the wagon, to the little pile of things a life gathers, whether it means to or not. Needle roll, skillet, dried flowers turned to brown lace, a child's ribbon saved for a day that had not arrived in time. "You will need water to grow a thing here," he said, "not just for the mouth, for the name." "I'll fight for it," she said. "Fight differently," he said. "Talk to the ground before you argue with men. It listens more and charges less." He took one step back, then another, paused. "Your sheriff's book," he said, and lifted his chin toward town. "It scratches and it heals, but there is another book that keeps. In our tongue, it is not a book, it is rock. We tell it with hoof and breath." The story bent then for a breath and spoke to you again, as if it had sat down on your porch and lowered its voice, so the neighbors would not hear. In the undertaker's ledger, there is a last notation beside the name of Silas Hart. "Entry wound confirmed, wax removed." If you follow the record from that page forward, you will find a brand drawn twice and then crossed. A brand that left one man's skin, marked a ledger, and then rode away on a colt's face, where no iron could ever claim it. Morning came with the color of pewter, warming to tin, then to coin. The herd was a shadow on the ridge, and then gone, a moving horizon that made its own weather. Wade rode out with a small escort and a larger set of thoughts. Greeley sat at his desk and wrote the things he should have written sooner. Agnes aired the parish books in the sun and let the moisture leave them without taking ink. Jose saddled a horse and told Eliza he would be back when the colt had learned the fence and the way to water without a lead rope. Eliza stood on the ridge at dusk and called once, not loudly. The colt with the lightning bolt blaze stepped out from behind the mare that had decided to stay a while. He looked at her the way wild things look when they are young and brave, which is to say, as if the world were offering a fair deal for once. He came 2 steps, stopped, tossed his head, came 2 more, stopped again. She did not reach. She let the air do what it does when it is not ordered by fear. The colt closed the last of the distance with a small, sudden choice and put his nose into her palm and breathed. The land all around was still a predator. It would always be. But tonight it yielded, not because it had been beaten, but because something older than men had been honored with a trade that did not cheat. She turned toward the wagon, toward the ground that would need fence and shovel and luck, toward a name that would be written twice where it belonged and not scratched away, toward the kind of long work that mends what fast work breaks. The colt followed, steps skittish, then steadier, the bolt on his face catching the last of the light like a promise held out and not withdrawn. And if the ledger ever speaks again, you will know which page to open first. The one where a woman traded a horse for a life, and the world, after much argument, agreed she had bought more than she paid for.